Hello, everyone. Oops.
Hi, welcome.
Hi. So I wanted to introduce Adan Jerreat-Poole so that they can talk about their upcoming book in September, and then we'll carry on.
Sure, thanks so much, Joe. So my debut book is coming out in September. It's called The Girl of Hawthorne and Glass. It's a young adult fantasy. It was really fun to write. I was writing it at the same time as I was writing my dissertation, so it was like a slightly different kind of writing, a lot more like battles and like flirtation, very fun. Um, and it's about a teenage assassin who's trying to break free from the confinements of her life and, making friends and falling in love. All the main characters are queer, which I'm really excited about, and one of the characters is non-binary, which I'm really wanted to write as a non-binary person because I don't see that identity represented widely in fiction. It's the first in a duology, so I do have a draft of the second one that I'm excited about. I don't want to tell you too much about it, but if you like fantasy, if you like queer literature, if you like adventures, then I think you might enjoy the book. Joe, I'd love to hear more about your memoir. I've heard really incredible things about it, and I haven't finished it myself, but I am really excited to. The writing's fantastic. So, tell us about it.
Well, first of all, I just want to say I just started reading your book as well, and I think it's really good. I've only gotten into the first 20, 30 pages. I know there's a lot to come, but the style is fantastic, and your ability to write fantasy and just think outside of this world is magical. So kudos to you. I think it's going to be an awesome read, and I hope you and wish you much success with that. You're welcome. My memoir came out this last year, and it's called All We Knew But Couldn't Say. And I also identify as non-binary. And for those of us who are just cluing in, I just want to say welcome. I don't think we did that. Welcome to our interview together. And we're doing this as part of a Pride sort of event, I think, for queer authors. And those of us who identify as non-binary or however we identify inside the queer community. Saying the word non-binary is something we don't hear a lot in our industry, and we don't see a lot in words or in film and television. So we're trying to kind of change that, and I think now is a perfect time, and it's a really great thing to have two of us who identify as non-binary presenting in this interview. So thank you for joining us, anyone who's there. My memoir is a pretty deep story about what it was like to grow up in the 70s and 80s and what it was like to live in an abusive home with two parents who were abusive, and leaving home as a teenager, moving into a new city and being isolated and alone, and attending school for the arts, and having a public career as an actor that grew from my adolescent years into my adult years. And the struggles that I experienced as a result of carrying trauma from childhood, but also entering an adult industry filled with homophobia, misogyny, and violence, really. And it was a really complex time. But I was determined to come out and stay out. And so it was a lot of hard years and a lot of struggle, but it led to this time in my life, I would say. Since those early days, I've also been an activist and an advocate and worked really hard in other areas to lend my voice and my time to social justice movements, and hopefully to having an impact in the world that we're living in. So all of it I do. I still act, and I'm writing for sure. I'm working on another book, YA, about queer kids, street kids, and trying to write a kid book too about being queer. So there's a whole lot of stuff going on in my head, but that's my ramble to start. So Adan, tell us more. Why this story? I wanted to know why this fantasy realm. What was it about that genre that drew you in?
What fantasy realm? I grew up reading fantasy and really loving it. And sort of into my teens and young adult years, I got more into maybe literary fiction. And I started writing I was definitely one of those teenagers who like wanted to be Sylvia Plath. So I wrote these like very short, vaguely sad, moody stories that didn't have endings. We all had that phase.
Can I just say there's a piece in my memoir that I don't even know if I say I thought I was the reincarnation of Sylvia Plath, but I definitely talk about the poetry of Sylvia Plath. So we have something in common there.
Exactly. I still love her poetry, actually. She's fantastic. But yeah, and it was during my PhD, and I hadn't done creative writing for a few years because I'd been doing so much academic writing, and I was going through a period of depression, and I was really struggling. And I think I started wanting a bit of an escape, and I turned back to the fantasy genre. And between being like, when I was like 10 or 12 and being like 30, the YA genre has really opened up, and there's so much more being published. And a lot of it is really feminist. It's really intersectional. It's really anti-capitalist, even the fantasy and science fiction books. So I just fell in love with it, and I started reading, like voraciously. I was reading so much YA fantasy, and I started thinking, this is fun. I could do this. I could make my own world, and could imagine myself into the non-binary and queer characters that I want to see. So that's where it started. And it just started as, an escapist sort of fun exercise for me. And then I kept writing, and I was like, I'm going to finish this. I'm going to make this a book.
Yeah.
That's where it came out of.
And do you find that you're able to write now during the time of COVID, or is it harder or easier, or does it give you, you feel like you have permission now, or like how are you experiencing that?
Yeah, it's been hard. I am working on a new book, a science fiction book, which I'm excited about, but I have been having a hard time finding the time and energy to write. Definitely struggling a bit with my mental health, and I also have chronic pain issues which have been acting up. So I've actually been finding it quite hard to write, to find the space. I feel like I'm frequently, I've been in my bedroom all day, or like been in a small space. It's hard to mentally put myself somewhere else. Like it takes a lot more effort. Actually, I want to ask you more about your memoir, but if you have any like advice on how you're writing during quarantine and COVID, and I'm finding the stress also really difficult.
I think the thing that I've learned, and it isn't just about writing. Sometimes it's about, like, I do a number of things. Like I'm also the chair of an LGBTQ committee in the Toronto Actor Union, and I'm still an actor, and I'm working on some screen stuff. So there's a lot of things that I have to do that require concentration. And it was really hard in the beginning. It took a couple of months, I think, but I was terrified in the beginning. Like I think a lot of people were, what is this disease? And we're wearing masks, and we can't touch anybody. We can't go anywhere. We have to order stuff online. And if any of us have immunocompromised issues, which I do as well, then we also have to keep that much more distance from the world. So it was really scary those first 2 months, and nothing was getting done at all. And I don't think anybody was able to, I don't think. But as time sort of moved forward and we learned more, I started to become a little less frightened and more inside myself. And then I just started every day without putting pressure on myself, but allowing myself however much time during the day to read and write. And if I was able to accomplish something, I gave myself a pat on the back and went, yes, even if it was only a sentence. And it helped to talk to other people who were experiencing the same thing. And I did a couple of online writing sessions with people, which I think really help, because it forces you to sit, and you're not really talking to anybody. You're just sitting there with your computer, but you have this designated 1 hour to write. And so there'd be a pool of us of 10, 20 people, and we'd be writing no matter what. Some people would write notes in the chat, but the idea was to focus together, and that really helped as well. So I think not putting pressure on yourself, and knowing that it's okay. You get done what you can, but to try and do it every day. And not beat yourself up, because we're in a global pandemic and everything has changed. So you just know that our lives have shifted, and we do the best we can when we're also dealing with issues of depression or illness or, you know, chronic pain. I mean, those are a lot of issues that you're talking about. So, yeah, I say just be gentle, but push yourself a little bit too, right? Try both.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. I like the idea
Yeah, I
of
don't know if
writing
that
a
does that
little
make
bit.
any sense?
It does. It's like sitting down to write a bit, having a community, I think would be great. I definitely would love to connect with people online. But yeah, not expecting too much. I do think, yeah, we're in the middle of a pandemic, but it's often easy to forget, or there's sort of external forces sort of saying, well, like, you need to be productive, you need to be working full time or more than full time. And I'll say, well, why am I so tired? Why is this so hard? And then I'll have to step back and say, like, hey,
Yeah.
actually, this is a really hard time. It's okay to not be productive. I mean, it's always okay to not be productive. Yeah. You know, it's not promote.
I agree, and I think that we're in such a difficult time in terms of social justice issues and politics, and I'm not talking just Canada, but I mean, there's also a lot of hope, but there's a lot of difficult things happening in the world with respect to Black Lives Matter and violence on the rise, and neo-Nazis and white supremacists, and you know, homophobia and transphobia and Black trans people being murdered, and it's just there's all that, as well as the backdrop of COVID and the rise of, you know, the unknown, I think, and not knowing how long it's going to take and what kind of jobs are we all going to have in the near future. Like, there's a lot of things that we're all filtering in our bodies and minds every day that we don't think about necessarily, or we do think about all the time and or never sleep. And we're trying to function and live these so-called normal lives. But how normal is it really when all of this stuff is happening at the same time? Like, it's hard to find balance in the middle of chaos. And I think for anybody who has trauma issues, certainly, you know, all of what's going on can certainly induce, you know, post-traumatic stress disorder or sleeplessness or depression. So all of these things are really happening at the same time. So, wow, if you can get work done, that's what I say.
Yeah, it's overwhelming.
Yeah. But let's switch gears, maybe.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, let's talk about our queer peoples.
Let's talk about our queer people. Yeah.
Yeah. When did you come out, or do you only identify as non-binary, or?
So I identify as non-binary and bisexual or pansexual. What about you?
Well, when I always identified as lesbian, and then there was a time where I started to say the word queer because it grew on me. At first, I didn't like the word, like 15 years ago, even 20 years ago. But I'm older than you now, right? So I've kind of grown up with the acronyms changing and the letters changing. But I like lesbian. I like queer. I certainly love the word non-binary. It's very exciting to me because I never had a category to express my gender, I should say, or a word. So it helped a lot. I used to say soft butch, but I was like, what am I? It wasn't enough, right? Like I needed more, and I didn't really feel like I was transgender, but I didn't really feel inside myself. So even that word non-binary and the creation of that word, or the explosion of gender queer issues in the new generation, excites me deeply, and I'm really grateful that the language has expanded, and I've kind of found a home in this place of non-binary in terms of gender expression as well as sexuality.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Okay, so I have to ask. So I came out as non-binary maybe only like 2 or 3 years ago, and I've been sort of experimenting with my gender expression, which has been really fun, and my style. And I've been trying to dress a little more, playing with more masculine styles. I love your style. I think you look incredible.
Aw, thanks.
How have you explored what what to wear and how you want to express yourself?
It's a good question. I think I've always, when I was quite young, I was a tough girl, and I always wore jeans and t-shirts and leather jackets, and that's all you'd see me in. Nice. And then as I got a little bit older, I started to you know, I didn't know where to find clothing, to be honest. When I was quite young, I'd be afraid to walk in the boy aisles, but they were the only aisles I wanted to walk in. I didn't want to walk through the clothing store for girls. I didn't want to see all those pink tight shirts and floral this and dresses and skirts, and none of it ever spoke to me, and I always felt uncomfortable. So it wasn't until I started being brave enough to explore all those boy aisles that I started picking out shirts that I liked, and pants and ties and blazers and jackets, and then I'd have to get those fitted because of course they're not meant for short people like me, of, you know, a different sex. So, you know, there's always, clothing is always an issue, but now I feel comfortable just getting any clothing that I like, that to me is probably more masculine, but it fits, it feels right on my body. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, the fitting is definitely an issue where I'm like, sometimes I'm a boy size, sometimes I'm like a small man. I'm a little short for most of them.
And then you have to get a tailor, right?
Yeah.
And somebody's going to make a ton of money one day when they open up a non-binary trans clothing store or something, right? Like, it's not going to be me because I'm an artist. I don't have time for that. But I think it's a really good idea.
Yeah, exactly.
So what kind of books do you love? Who are your queer artists and writers and people that you look up to, and icons, people that you you've thought about historically?
Like okay, that's a huge question.
It is a big question.
It is. I'm not sure about historically, but one of my favorite authors right now is Anna Marie McLemore. And they're a non-binary Mexican American author. They do write urban fantasy and YA, and I love their writing. I think the book they wrote, it's called Blanca and Roja. It was the first book I read that had a non-binary protagonist, and I was like so excited to like see this in a book. And they write trans characters and queer characters. So that's something I think I own like 5 of their books, and I'm always like going back to them. That's definitely someone that I really admire.
I want their books now. I'm pretty sure I heard that title though. So I think it must be quite popular because I've heard her name.
Yeah, right.
Their name.
Right. Yeah. What about you? Is there like an author or an artist that like you first like came to or was excited about?
I think, you know, it changed a lot because I feel like I'm such an activist, an LGBTQ activist and advocate, that a lot of my readings at the time were, when I was younger anyway, things were related to queerness. Like, you know, I tried to read, you know, people like James Baldwin or Audre Lorde, you know, back in the day. And then it got, you know, and then it changed in the women's movement. I started reading, you know, feminist works, and I never really read a lot of fiction or fantasy. A lot of the writing and reading that I did was more related to what was happening in the world and social issues and politics, social justice stuff. And it wasn't until I was a little older that I veered into fiction and novels. And, you know, prior to that, it was a lot of screenplays as well. And of course, because of my work as an actor. So, you know, that was where my head was. It was in learning as much as I could by people who came before me, and trying to understand, you know, things like Stonewall or the AIDS crisis and what was happening in the 90s and the 80s and the 90s. And so a lot of nonfiction. But now I'm trying to broaden every part of my brain and my creative mind so that I can get better as a writer as well. And I started to read more YA, and so it's an exciting time. I feel like the thing about getting older and even about writing and trying new things is that there's no limit, right? There's so much to learn from out there in terms of what exists. And we can only limit ourselves, I think. And so, yeah, I know that sounds really boring, but
Not boring at all.
I
Like
just
James
think,
Baldwin, Audre
yeah,
Lorde, fiction, nonfiction. They're such amazing writers.
yeah, and yeah, that's it. I could go on for a long time about people who inspire me, but that could get boring. So,
I don't know. Like I hear you. I think so much of why I write is because I love reading and I read
yeah,
so much or watch shows that I feel inspired by. And
yeah,
a lot of it is contemporary, which I also find exciting. You were
yeah,
mentioning it is a really hard time. I mean, it's always been a hard time. Some issues are getting more,
yeah,
there's more awareness, but there is a lot of hope. There is change. There are a lot of incredible activists and intersectional feminists out there, and it's fun to read their work and sort of feel connection and feel that
yeah.
hope.
And I feel it's really important to say in every interview now, yeah, like, I'm not just saying I'm anti-racist. I'm not just saying I'm Black Lives Matter. I'm not,
Mm-hmm.
it's important to say these things online, but it's also really important to show up. And if you can't protest, what is it that we're doing? How are we advancing the culture that we all live in together? And how do
Mm-hmm.
we make anti-racism a priority as well? Because not everybody gets to go to sleep at night and not worry about somebody shooting them in the head while they're sleeping, right? Like white skinned people don't have to do that. Like we can turn it off, right? So like, just like being queer, like it's or a woman, like to walk down the street, inspires a certain level of caution and fear sometimes, because you don't know if the scary white dude behind you is homophobic or violent, and you always have to watch your back. And I think that when we talk about intersectionality, I think that those are some of the ways that we communally understand what oppression is, and systemic oppression, and how people have internalized violence and have internalized racism and hatred and homophobia and sexism. And how do we get rid of all that and dismantle it all? And I think that's what's really exciting about this moment in time, is that even though it's horrible, there is a massive movement afoot around dismantling systems of oppression. And I think that we talked about, and we touched about through email, this thing about defunding the police. And I saw that in a tweet that you wrote, that if we might talk about that. And I think it's an important thing to allocate funds that were meant for the police into funds that are meant to go to people who service communities, whether it's mental health issues or the educational system, or other systems that are better suited to improve the lives of not just Black people, but poor people, or people who are struggling with violence, or homeless kids, or whatever. Right? Police are not the answer, but I'm just wondering what your thoughts are.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. I think it's very Pride appropriate to be having these conversations, since Pride started as like a protest against police violence, both at Stonewall and then the Canada's was it 1981 in Toronto, the bathhouse raids response?
I think it was around there.
Around then, yeah. So there's a long history of Pride being anti-police violence and drawing attention to that. So definitely, I think white, queer, and trans people need to stand up in support of our Black and Indigenous, sisters, brothers, non-binary, and two-spirit family.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think the system of policing we have now is very much, it's based on a systemic racism. It polices poor people, it polices trans people. It's a system of punitive, it's not justice, right? It's punishment and violence. And I think we should be taking those funds and supporting communities and trying to, address broader issues of systemic poverty, of taking care of people who have mental health issues rather than harming them. And I think we sort of, as a society, I'd like us to move towards dismantling systems of oppression and also focusing on care rather than hurt.
and dismantling the prison system too, because I think, like, I don't know if you ever watched the film The 13th, but by Ava DuVernay, but I mean, it's just an amazing reality check about how the system of slavery really didn't end. It just was transferred into the prison system, and even in Canada, how Black and Indigenous people are the ones that are largely in prison. And in the margins, and who are penalized, and I feel like we've got to deal with that stuff at home, right? Like Canada is not that much better than, let's say, the States. It's just that it looks a little bit different here, that's all. But like, people like us have a role to play in that, white-skinned people, because we created racism. I mean, our ancestors did over 400 years ago, but we're part of it, right? Like, either we perpetuate it or we help dismantle it, and so anyway, those are just some thoughts. But I mean, I don't know if we're getting completely off topic as writers.
No, I'm glad that you brought it up. Yeah, I definitely feel like Canada has this sense of the national identity of Canada is to be like slightly better than the States. So if we think of ourselves as slightly better, then we don't have to change things, which is such a dangerous viewpoint. No, but definitely the abolishing prisons, I think, is so important for the reasons you said. And I'm actually chatting from Kingston, which is where I live, and it is a predominantly white town. And there've been sort of public discussions like, oh, like, do we have racism here? And like, yes, we do. But also, Kingston, I think, is the carceral capital of Canada. We have like multiple federal prisons. Like, we're like the prison capital. I'm like, we absolutely have problems at home that we need to challenge. And yeah,
you used to have the prison for women there, though, but I think they closed it down a number of years ago, and came over to Brampton or something like that, Vanny or whatever.
Yeah, my mom used to volunteer there. And I know they've been campaigning to close it because it meant that women were like being incarcerated very, very far away from their families, and they wanted to, try to incarcerate women closer to their families, which is still like not challenging the underlying violence of the system.
I agree. And they separate young mothers from their newborn babies too, for what, theft? What are we doing, right? What are we doing to those mothers and those babies? That usually that happens because they're poor, trying to raise children, and children are hungry. Right? So like, let's address those issues, which is, I think, the point about defund the police, because if we take those billions of dollars away from a punitive system and put it towards housing and education and help with parenting and support systems, so that people can raise their families without being penalized and going through the court system, the justice system. I mean, we have so many things that we have to change culturally, and I'm a little scared because things are going to take a long time. But I guess that's why, as writers, like, I think it's important for us to use the tools that we have and our voices, and as advocates and activists and whatever work that we do, to address some of this stuff in the ways that we should be addressing it. I mean, I'm not saying that we should talk for people, because that's wrong too. Not. But we have a role to play in making the world a better place, not just for others, but people in our own communities and in families. And if equity is the goal, then we should use our platforms, no matter how small or big, to achieve that. And that's what I think.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think education, like writing, there's such an education role in what we do, in connecting people. And, and sometimes one of the things I like about like speculative fiction is when authors imagine these futures and they're like, okay, what could we do differently? What would that look like? And I think it's important to have a collective imagination where we're not in that like, oh no, but if we dismantle the police, what will happen? And it's like, actually, these are the things that could happen, and they could be amazing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. Or revolution. Did I say it?
Yes, that's good.
So aside from the first two books that you're working, well, the one that you've already done is coming out in September, and the second one, Do you see yourself wanting to write other things, or is that the genre that you want to kind of stay in as an author, or do you know yet?
So the book I'm working on right now is jumping from YA to adult fiction, and it's kind of a hybrid fantasy science fiction. I was reading a lot of like Cameron Hurley and Rebecca Roanhorse, so it's a little like gritty, unlikable women protagonists, which I love. And I've been thinking about, some identities I want to represent, like asexuality, I think is really underrepresented. But I've been playing around with this idea of like creating a future, and I'm not writing a utopian book, but what are the elements of the future that could be different from ours in a positive way? What elements could be critical of the way society is now? So playing with those ideas, and I think you have a bit more space in adult fiction to sort of develop those. So I'd love to do that. Also, I would love to write, this is just like an aside, I would really love to write like a romance book where it's just like happy trans people who are happy. Because, we live with a lot of trauma and sometimes
you mean a false reality of trans love? That's nice fiction of
exactly
trans happiness.
That's the future goals, right?
I like that though. I mean, I think it would be an amazing, I think it's a fun fantasy, and hopefully it'll be a reality at some point where, LGBTQ people, queer, two-spirit, non-binary people can live in joy and live without fear and see ourselves in ways that aren't just about being beaten up and murdered or slaughtered by homophobes or, hated by our families. Like all of those things that we have been for centuries. It makes me cry, so I'm not going to try and cry. But I think that's why these conversations are important and why Pride still is important, because it's only been 15 years or 50 years since the Stonewall riots, and it's just not long enough. It's not, you hope that the human condition or that humanity would advance faster in terms of our empathy and our desire for equity and love, but it doesn't. And I can't ever wrap my head around that. Like, what propels a person to kill someone simply because they are not who you are, or they don't reflect who you are? Like, what psychopathy, in a sense, because to me it's a psychopathic, sociopathic person, and there's so many of them, and so maybe that's the wrong phrase, but there's so many hateful people, and I just don't, deep in my gut, I don't understand that, and it makes me very, very sad. So I've gone somewhere else from the writing of queer fantasy, but I do think like the reality of our lives compared to the hope, are two different extremes still, and how do we get from here to there?
Yeah, absolutely. I hear you. It makes me very sad too, and I wonder like, how are people taught to hate? Like, what are they? Because children aren't born naturally like hating people who are different from themselves. So what's happening between becoming a child to an adult who has such a strong hate? And how can we change that process as a society? I think is really important, which is one of the things I'm excited about. Sorry, I'm linking this back to your work. This is very clever of me, prepare. Like, why it's so important to have like diverse young adult and children's books that I think can maybe help combat some of the hatred people might be learning in the media, popular media, or at home. And I want to hear what you're going to say, and then also I wanted to ask you more about your YA and children's book ideas.
No, you just have to shut me up because I can go on. So please finish.
No, I love it.
No, I was just going to say that I think children learn to hate from the adults around them, and the children who've picked up that hatred from their adults, right? So I know as a kid, I was forced to go to church. the lessons in church were not all about love necessarily. And there were adults who would say horrible words about queer people, and we know what those horrible words are, so I'm not going to repeat them. And sometimes those things were said to be funny, right? So, and they're not funny, but you internalize those messages, and you keep internalizing all those messages, and we all internalize those things for years and years and years, and we're not even aware of it because it's just a normal part of our everyday life, whether it's learning racism or homophobia or misogyny or transphobia. All of those things are constantly being absorbed by our bodies as little beings our entire lives, and it requires deep thinking, effort, and an understanding to get rid of all that crap and to change everything from the ground up. Like to bad parenting is bad parenting. You don't teach kids to hate kids because of the color of their skin or because of their gender or because of their sexuality. And if you're doing that, you're being a bad parent because you're teaching hate, right? And that sort of breeds more hate. And then those little kids grow up and they have a way of thinking that's just, and they're like, oh, this is how it is. And I'm like, Do you know what I'm saying? Am I getting off on a tangent?
Absolutely. No, I definitely agree. Definitely.
Yeah. And it's much bigger than that, but it's just one thing.
Of course, it's one place where it starts.
Yeah. What was your question?
Well, I wanted to hear more about your the YA book and kids book that you're starting your plan.
So the YA, I have 2 YA books now that are floating around in my head, and so I keep writing a ton of notes for both of them. So I've plotted them both out, which is really fun.
I'm impressed. I'm impressed with you. Yeah. I have such a hard time plotting.
Yeah, plotting is fun. And then the first one I started working on is a YA about queer homeless kids, and the protagonist is a 15-year-old who gets thrown out by their Catholic parents, excuse me. So I'm writing and rewriting that, and then figuring out where to go with that. And then a whole new idea came to me about 2 weeks ago. I'm not going to say what it is, but I just was excited about that idea, so I plotted that idea all out. And then I really wanted to write a kids book about gender, so I've been working on that in the mornings for like a little bit every day, just to help myself sort of feel like I'm accomplishing different things with the writing, which I feel like I am now, and I wasn't 2-3 months ago. I was in deep bad space around COVID and lots going on. But I've worked out a system now where I can feel okay about creating, and I feel relatively busy on all of it, but it all feels really exciting. Like somehow the doors of plotting have lifted, and I feel like I have all of these LGBTQ stories I really want to tell. So I'm just trying to figure out what those are, and a lot of it is just the thinking and the plotting and feeling excited about that.
That's so amazing.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
I love all of the LGBTQ kids books that are coming out. And I'm the only queer person in my family that I know of. Maybe all my cousins will like come out after this, but I feel like it's my job to like send my niece, who's like 3.5, like all of these books, being like, you can be queer, just so you know I'm here.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. But I think that if kids, again, that's about education, right? So if children never see themselves, even in a little picture book, right? Then they just never know it exists, that they exist. Like they're just invisible, and they don't even have the language for that yet. But the more of those books and that we write, whether it's for little children and picture books, or middle grade, or YA, or adults who are just coming out at 50 and 60, and they've been terrified because of the culture that they grew up in, and one of extreme violence and hate. So, I mean, there's a lot of stories that we could write and tell, and I think that's what's so exciting about this time. We just need the book industry and the film industry and those in positions of power to also meet us, right? And support us and help us get there, so that there's more of us and more of the works that we're creating.
Definitely. Right, we need platforms.
We need platforms. Definitely need platforms. Well, I'll be reading your work now. I've for sure started your book, and so now
Thank you.
I look forward to reading more of it and following you as you grow into your writing career. And congrats to you. I know it's a big deal to get your first book published. It was really big for me to get my memoir published, and I'm very grateful. Thanks, Dundurn. Thanks, Sam. Thanks, everybody out there. Diane.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah. And Catherine and Susan Fitzgerald, the editors. And Scott, of course, Scott. Hi, Scott. And Elham, and there's so many people, right? But yeah, here we are, right? So I wish us both healthy writing futures, and if you need anything, just reach out, and we can write together in our corners.
Thank you. I would love to do that.
And we don't talk, we just write.
Just write, yeah. Exactly.
And then that is it. You know, hit the alarm and then say goodnight. That's it. That's all. You know.
That sounds great.
Anyway, so I think we're gonna wrap it up soon. It's
right. Yeah. Oh my God, the time's gone so fast.
It's been about 40 minutes, but was there anything else that you wanted to? I think maybe we should both sign off saying what we're doing. Maybe like I have a few things on the go right now, not just the writing, but some other things, and maybe you might like to as well. So, floor's to you.
Sure. Yeah. Right. So I'm working on this science fiction book about science fiction fantasy. It's about lesbians. One of them is asexual. I'm really excited about it. I'm also have submitted my dissertation, so I should be defending hopefully in August. Thank you. My work is on, I do disability studies from kind of an intersectional feminist perspective in digital media. Right. I'm really interested in disability activism. So that's great. And I'm hoping to take some time off to just like breathe and relax with my partner. So that's what I'm looking forward to this summer.
And when does your book come out?
I think it is now coming out on September 12th.
Are you doing some kind of a virtual launch or something for your book?
I haven't planned one yet, but I think I probably will. I think, yeah, that's another thing I'll start planning to do.
I guess the thing with online is that even if it's not on the 12th, you could just make it October 12th if you want.
That's true. It can be whenever.
It's okay, right?
Nice.
This is the launch of my book, right? So,
yeah, I mean, the plus side is I can do it, you know, in like my nice button-up shirt and then, you know, like my pajama bottoms. So, you know, pros and cons.
I agree. I've had a couple of meetings like that myself through Zoom. Just don't stand up.
Right, you have to be careful about that.
Make sure you're wearing pants, right?
Make sure you're wearing pants before you stand up. Or you do the sideways exit.
That's.
And what about you?
What am I doing? So I don't think it's going to happen, but I mean, happen or not. But I think tomorrow the announcement for the Kobo Emerging Writers Prize is will be announced, and I was shortlisted as one of the nonfiction books. So that's been really exciting. And then thank you. And then I'm doing my book was selected for the Amnesty Book Club for the months of July and August, and so I'm very excited about that because they're going to be featuring my memoir, and I have a big interview coming up in July with the gender rights campaigner, Jackie Hansen, her name is, and we'll be doing a big interview around human rights, and I'm really excited about that too. So just really grateful that there's been this still stream of support and encouragement around my memoir. Now I'm hitting the 1 year mark, but it still seems to have a decent life, and I'm very, very happy and grateful that there are spaces and places that are still embracing it, and that there's more work to do around it. So yeah, it's been good. So that's it really with that. And I think I'm recording the audio book for my memoir in the next couple of months as well.
Oh, amazing! Are you doing the audio?
Yeah, I'll be reading my own memoir, and it's a Kobo contract, so it'll be available audiobook through Kobo soon enough. So so go check out Adan's book. Do you have a book? Do you have a physical book? Put it up.
I do not have a physical book, sadly. I still
It
I
hasn't been
know.
printed yet.
I know. I didn't get an ARC.
What's it called again?
The Girl of Hawthorne and Glass.
The Girl of Hawthorne and Glass. Pick up that book in September, and if you haven't picked mine up yet, please pick it up. All We Knew But Couldn't Say. Yeah. And I guess that's it. I'm just grateful to meet you, and I'm wishing you all the best with everything.
Well.
And let's stay connected.
Definitely.
Okay.
Does that mean we hang